So if you want the best decks to climb to Legend, these are going to be the top 10, and this is going to be a mix of personal preference and my own experience, as well as statistics from Diamond through High Legend on Hearthstone replay. So let's just jump into it. The first one is going to be Mech Paladin. Mech Paladin is just broken. It was already, I think, the third highest win rate deck before the nerfs. I think it literally went Naga, Demon Hunter, Quest Hunter, and then Mech Paladin. And then it wasn't nerfed, and with the meta slowing down, it gives you a little bit more time to get those really big Divine Shield minions, helps you scale up the Security Automaton, which just allows you to snowball and win the game. Some people have asked me, why do I run the Blade Master Samuro? It's really the only way that you can come back into the game if you end up losing control, so I do like having that one extra way of potentially coming back. But if you don't want to run it, you could definitely take it out for a Stonehearth Vindicator, so you can try to draw that Radar Detector a little bit more consistently, or you can run any in order to get a Divine Shield, Rush, Wind Fury version of whatever mech you have on the board at the time. So the next deck on the list is going to be Control Warrior, and you can build this in two different ways. You can build it normal control with Kazakusan, or you could build it with the charge variation. I like Kazakusan a little bit more, but charge is more of an OTK, just immediate guaranteed win condition, so it's up to you what you want to do. But this deck is really good because, one, it was already strong before the nerf, similar to Paladin, and wasn't nerfed. The two cards people thought would get nerfed, Nelly as well as From the Depths, were not nerfed, which is great for Warrior, and it's just already a little bit more refined than some of the newer decks that people are experimenting with, so at least for the first week or so, it'll definitely remain top tier. The only issue with this deck is some of the decks that are seeing an increase in play rate are slower, more value centric, like Thief Rogue, as well as Beast Hunter, potentially with extra Colossal minions, depending on what build you're going, as well as Mech Paladin and Mech Mage. All those decks actually do fairly well against Control Warrior, but if you know what you're doing, Control Warrior should be able to beat most of those matchups. So this one is going to be the first new deck on this list, and it is Beast Hunter. It's not necessarily new, but it's new on the tier list, and you can build this in several different ways. I like running the Cornelius Roam for extra draw, and Dire Frenzy so we could get a ton more Mountain Bears or Hydrolodons. You can also run the version with the Ambassador Phelan. I really ran this version because I absolutely loved beating Control Warriors. I was playing a lot day one, and this is when I initially made the deck, but if Control Warrior falls off, you might want to be a little bit less greedy and take out Dire Frenzy or Phelan or both, and maybe put in an extra one drop or two like the Trogs, just so you have, or the Slither Spear, just so you have that little bit of extra early pressure, which will help into certain matchups. But based on what I've been going against for the first couple of days, I think that this version is the best, but it's up to you. Overall, just get big beasts, super good value. Let's jump into the next one. The next deck on this list is Mech Mage, another class that was not nerfed, even though there were a lot of people asking for at least one card to be nerfed, the Mecha Shark. That wasn't nerfed, and then you also have the ability to generate a lot of value, whether it be randomly discovering beasts off of the Deep Run Engineer, Amalgam, or the Asharan Sweeper, which gives you the Sunken Sweeper, which gives you 3 random mechs. You're just constantly able to pump out mechs, and then late game you could run the Drakefire Amulet with the Belinda, which basically allows you to just have a really big swing turn if your mechs aren't able to finish them off. Not to mention the fact that this deck has a built-in OTK that does 36 damage if you have 2 Mecha Sharks and I think 5 other mechs, which is pretty easy to do, especially when you can reduce their cost at the Seafloor Gateway. I guess easy is a bit of a strong word, but it's definitely doable. So if you're playing against a deck that you might not be able to kill, it's just a great way to finish them over the top. You don't even need 5 mechs if you're able to do some chip damage. So overall, I think Mech Mage was already really strong. You could take out any. A lot of people ask me in these mech decks, is any absolutely necessary? And I actually don't think so. I think that she's good, but kind of overkill in a lot of situations. And if you want to take her out for even just a fireball for good damage over the top, it would definitely be fine. The next deck on this list might be a little bit controversial in terms of how high I am putting on this list, but it's going to be Naga Mage with the hero power variation. And the reason why I'm putting it this high on the list is because, one, with Ignite and the hero powers, you can go basically into the late game and beat some of the best late game decks in the game, whether it be Control Warrior or Druid, especially if they have a slightly slower start and can't get Kazakusan out super duper early. It's able to compete with early early and mid-range decks because you have like one of the best turn 5s in the history of Hearthstone, being able to fill up your entire board, have mana left over, wipe your opponent's entire board, as well as drawing like 6 cards. And all you need to do in order to do that is the Siren, a 1-cost Naga, and a cheap spell to start the whole combo. It's really, really strong. So it's basically good at every single stage of the game, and I think it's a little hard to play, so some people might not have that initial like crazy win rate, but I really love this deck. I think it's my second favorite deck of the expansion, just because those turn 5s and sometimes turn 6s are just so fun. So the next deck on this list is going to be basically an even split between Pirate Rogue and Thief Rogue. So first of all, you have the really good tempo of Pirate Rogue and Thief Rogue, actually, with especially the buff to Wild Pawn Knoll. You play Double Agent and Wild Pawn Knoll somewhere around turn 2 and turn 3 to get that really good early game board presence. You also have some good cheap pirates if you don't have these Thief cards. And then late game, you can close it out with Mr. Smite, Krakatoa, or Pirate Admiral Hooktusk if the early game tempo wasn't enough, which it usually is, especially if you're able to get out an early Asharan Vessel. So overall, I really, really like this deck. I think it's a good split on 2 fun archetypes. And since neither archetype is really like absolutely exceptional on their own, it kind of makes sense in some weird way that together, splitting it 50-50, it turns into arguably the best rogue deck out right now. So I really like this deck. I hope you guys do too. Let's jump into the next one. So the next deck on this list, and it might be a little surprising it's this low, is Murloc Warlock. And the main reason it's this low is because I feel like it has some of the most polarizing matchups. You know, like Mech Mage, Mech Paladin, and Beast Hunter are all fairly board-based decks with big minions. But their matchups aren't like you guaranteed win some and you guaranteed lose others. This one, it feels like that. I struggled against Control Warrior significantly, which is still fairly popular. Shield Shatters and Brawls, if your board gets wiped 1, maybe 2 times, you basically lose the game with this deck. It's not really good at coming back into the game, but its snowball potential is insane. So slower, greedier decks like Ramp Druid never have a chance against this one. So it's really matchup dependent, and because of how polarizing it is, at least in my experience, I didn't want to put it any higher. But I did go 9-3. It did feel good to play, and if you like Murlocs, this is probably the best Murloc deck in the game right now. But I do plan on trying out Murloc Shaman in the near future. So the next deck on this list is, sadly, Quest Warrior. So 2 patches ago, this quest was nerfed, and it was slowed down by 1 pirate, which was actually a much bigger deal than a lot of people initially thought it was going to be. I said that nerfing it by 1 pirate would slow its quest down by 1 turn, which would basically kill the quest. And it wasn't totally correct. The quest was still playable, but it was a lot worse. Now, fast forward to this nerf and buff patch, the meta has slowed down drastically. 2 of the most aggressive decks in Hearthstone, Drekthar Naga Demon Hunter and Drekthar Quest Hunter, were both gutted, basically lost 9% win rates and are no longer playable. And because of that, the meta is drastically slowing down. So the 1-turn slowdown of the Warrior quest is basically negated and is going back to its basic, like its previous form of just finishing its quests before most other classes are able to really do anything, and then snowballing the game from there. It's really, really strong. Its win rate has gone back up to 54%. Its play rate tripled since the nerf 2 patches ago. It's just really, really strong, and it's fairly cheap, so wouldn't blame me if it started playing this deck again. So the next deck on this list is Curse Warlock, and initially I didn't think these buffs are going to be that big of a deal, but then I realized, hey, wait a minute, Dragged Below, since it's 3 mana, can now be discovered off of School Teacher. So if you reduce the cost of a lot of cards, it's just 1 more card that can be comboed with Bran in order to give your opponent more Dragged Belows, which is really, really, really strong. And it basically means that some of the more difficult matchups, like Control Warrior was a little while ago, become a lot more winnable because you're able to give him a couple more curses over the course of the game, which means your late game burst is higher, your damage overall is just higher, and their armor is no longer enough to deal with it. So overall, I really, really like this deck. It was fun to play. It is a little bit difficult because it depends on your opponent's hand size. I think if your opponent plays really, really well, this matchup or this deck could be a little bit worse, but especially when you're climbing through Diamond and mid to low Legend, it'll be really, really good. So the last deck on this list before I get to my 2 quick honorable mentions is going to be Burn Shaman. And Burn Shaman is on this list because I think it'll do well against what's in the game right now. It's got a lot of potential burst damage because of the burn, but the main thing that I think is good about this deck is the Snowfall Guardian. Because the game is slowing down and becoming more mid-range board focused, being able to just freeze your opponent's board with Snowfall Guardian is going to just be enough to win the game sometimes, especially if you're able to follow it up with another board freeze off of the Brilliant Macaw, and then after that, set up your OTK by playing, you know, spell damage, bioluminescence, and then just OTKing your opponent. And this does really, really well against decks like Druid that can fill up their board quite suddenly. Then you board lock them, and they're like, shoot, now I can't play, you know, my Kazakusan or whatever to end up winning the game. So it's actually really, really good. I have high hopes for this deck. It's got like a 52% win rate on Hearthstone Replay. I haven't played it too much myself personally, which is why I'm rating it at 10th, but I do think that it has the potential to be higher if you play it a little bit more consistently than I have been. So these are the last two little honorable mention decks, and the first one's going to be Quest Priest. This one is very difficult to rate because it's a Highlander deck, so people can have a ton of different builds. But I think Quest Priest is in a pretty good spot because if the meta's slowing down and it got two different buffs with the with its Colossal Minion and Whirlpool each being 1 mana less, it makes the deck just a little bit more consistent, and I ended up going 4-1 with it. Super small sample size, but it felt good while playing, and especially considering you run 1 silence here, and if you want to, you can run a Smothering Starfish, so you can have 2 silences over the course of the game, which can be really, really good, especially if you're playing against decks with big pumps like Paladin or Shaman. So overall, very promising. And then the next deck on the list is going to be Face Hunter, which is just a really good aggro deck. I think this is in a prime position to become like the pure aggro deck, and it's been doing really well on ladder. It has like a 53% win rate overall. It is actually a higher win rate than Beast Hunter, but the sample size is ridiculously low. So I'm gonna be probably playing this deck over the next couple of days to give you guys a little bit more in-depth read as to how good I think the deck is, but it's on the honorable mentions list because I do think it has potential. It's fairly cheap, and if you like aggro, this is probably one of the best decks to go with, either that or like Murloc Warlock.